I'm Nora. I'm 35, and 3 weeks ago, my sister looked me in the eye at her own baby shower and told me to go try that dirty pub across the street. The one I've owned quietly for 6 years. She didn't know that. Nobody in my family did. Not my mother, not my stepfather, not my sister, and definitely not her husband, who'd spent 4 months secretly trying to buy the building out from under a man I loved, like a second father, using a forged signature with my name on it to do it. I want to tell you what happened between the moment my sister said that sentence in front of 40 guests and the moment, 3 weeks later, when a lawyer slid a folder across a conference table and every single person in that room finally understood exactly whose name was on the deed. Welcome back to Sweet Payback Stories, where the quiet ones are usually the ones holding the paperwork. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to know you, stay with me. Drop a comment and let me know you're here. I'm a structural engineer. I spend most of my week in hard hats and steel-toed boots, signing off on load calculations for buildings other people will walk through without ever thinking about the math holding the ceiling up. It's careful, unglamorous work, and I like it precisely because nobody claps for it. You do it right, or the building falls down. There's a clarity to that I've never found anywhere else in my life. What almost nobody in my family knows is that I also own half of a pub on Harrow Street called The Anchor. Low ceiling, scarred oak bar, a hand-painted sign my father repainted himself every few years because he refused to pay someone else to do it. My dad, Mac Bennett, tended bar there for over 20 years and became a partner in it with his best friend, Walt Kowalski, back in 1994, the same year I was born. When my dad died of a heart attack behind that bar at 58, I was 24, his half of the business passed to me. Quietly. On paper, in a filing cabinet in Walt's back office that nobody in my family ever thought to ask about, because nobody in my family thought there was anything about that place worth asking about. I've never corrected that assumption. My mother remarried 4 years after my father died, to Richard Voss, a retired corporate attorney with a lake house and strong opinions about which parts of our family history were worth mentioning at dinner parties. My father's old bar was not one of them, so I let it stay small. I went to work in a hard hat during the week and pulled pints behind my father's bar most Sunday nights, and I never once said the word owner out loud in my mother's house. Walt and I have a rhythm most people would call boring. Tuesdays I check the walk-in cooler compressor because I understand load and stress better than the repair guy he keeps overpaying. Thursdays I go over the books with him at the end of the bar, red pen in hand, the same way my father used to. Regulars call me the engineer, without knowing the joke runs deeper than they think. I'm not just an engineer who drinks there. I'm the reason the roof beams got reinforced 2 winters ago instead of condemned. Walt likes to say I saved the place twice, once with paperwork and once with steel. I've always liked that better than any title my family could have given me. My sister Cammie is 31, married to a commercial real estate broker named Grant Ellery, and 8 months pregnant with their first daughter. When the baby shower planning started in the family group chat back in April, I offered to help. Venues, food, whatever was useful. My mother replied first, "Oh sweetheart, Grant's already got a venue lined up through work, don't worry your head about it." Cammie added a laughing emoji and a heart. I asked reasonably, "I thought, what venue?" Nobody answered that question directly for 3 days. When Cammie finally did, it was a single line. "The Wren Room. It's gorgeous. You'll see. No address. No further detail." I let it go, the way you let go of 100 small things a year when the alternative is being told, again, that you're reading into things. I offered a second time anyway, a habit I've never fully broken, asked if she wanted help with favors, or if I could bring anything from the pub's kitchen, since Walt's fry cook does a caramel bread pudding people request for weddings. Cammie sent back a single laughing emoji, and LOL, no offense, but I don't think bar food really fits the vibe we're going for. I typed out an explanation of what the vibe of a 100-year-old bread pudding recipe actually was, then deleted it, the way I've deleted 100 explanations over the years rather than sound defensive about something nobody had asked me to defend. Week later, Grant texted me directly. which he almost never does. "Hey Nora." Random question. "You're the engineer in the family? You ever do work on Harrow Street? Curious about the old buildings down there? Might be some opportunity coming." I told him I didn't do commercial work on that block specifically, which was technically true, and asked what kind of opportunity he meant. He didn't answer that part. 2 days later, at a family dinner, I overheard him telling my stepfather Richard, in the tone men use when they think a room isn't really listening, that his firm was assembling a full block somewhere downtown, and that the last holdout's an old guy who won't budge, but he's tired, he'll fold. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Harrow Street has a lot of old buildings. I had no reason yet to think he meant mine. A week after that, Grant texted again, this time with a photo, a satellite image of a city block with a red outline, drawn around several parcels, Harrow Street clearly labeled at the bottom edge. Working on something exciting, can't say much yet, but this could be huge for us. Family stuff, honestly. Might change some things for everyone. I stared at the outline a long moment before I recognized the small rectangle near the corner, third from the intersection, as the anchor's footprint. I told myself it was probably nothing specific, a broker's excitement, nothing more. I didn't yet let myself follow the thought any further than that. The way you don't poke at a bruise you're hoping will just fade on its own. At that same dinner, my mother introduced me to Richard's visiting cousin with the sentence she's used my whole adult life. "This is Nora. She does something with buildings, engineering. I never quite understand it, but she's very responsible." Then, turning to Cammie's side of the table with an entirely different register in her voice, "And this is our Grant? He's absolutely brilliant with real estate. You should hear him talk about the deals he closes." Waiter, helping clear plates, Cammie mentioned the shower dress code, cream and sage, nothing too casual, and added, half joking, "Don't show up looking like you just came from that dive bar you're always disappearing to on Sundays. Save that look for the dirty pub." She laughed like it was nothing. I laughed too, because that's what you do, and I filed the sentence away without knowing yet how much weight it was going to carry. I stood at the sink afterward, rinsing dishes next to my mother, and asked her, careful to keep my voice light, whether it bothered her that I still helped out at Dad's old place. She dried a plate for a long moment before answering, "It's not that it bothers me, Nora, it's just that whole chapter was hard on all of us. Richard's world is so different, and I think it's nice for once that we get to just be normal." "You understand." I said I understood. I didn't, not fully, not yet, but I recognized the shape of the request underneath it. Be smaller, so the room stays comfortable, because I'd been granting that same request, quietly, for 11 years. I texted Cammie a few days later, gently, asking again for the shower address, and whether I could bring anything. She replied that everything was handled, and that I didn't need to stress about logistics. When I called my mother to ask the same thing, she sighed the specific sigh she reserves for, when she thinks I'm making something simple complicated. "Nora, it's a party, not a project. Just show up and be happy for your sister." I sat with that phrase, "just be happy for your sister," a long time that night. It wasn't the words. It was how automatically they arrived whenever I asked a direct question in my own family, as if wanting information were the same thing as withholding joy. I'd spent years accepting that trade without noticing I was making it. I texted Walt instead that same night, mostly to hear from someone who'd actually answer a straightforward question. He called back within the hour, gravelly and half asleep, and asked what was wrong. I told him it was nothing, just a long week. He was quiet for a second, then said, in the plain way he says most things, "Your dad used to get that same tired of explaining himself voice, you know. Used to say the bar never once asked him to shrink to fit in it. Family's supposed to be the same deal. Sounds like yours skipped that part of the manual." I didn't have an answer for that. I just said goodnight and sat in my dark kitchen a while longer, turning it over. That same week marked 11 years since my father died, and I finally did the thing I'd been putting off. Cleared out the last storage unit of his things, still paying monthly for a unit nobody had opened since the funeral. A stack of old bar ledgers. I found a small fireproof strong box I didn't recognize, locked, with a key taped to its underside in my father's handwriting. "For Nora, when she's ready. Inside was a notarized partnership agreement from 1994, the original founding document for the Anchor, signed by Mac Bennett and Walt Kowalski, splitting ownership 50-50, with a clause naming each partner's designated heir as automatic successor to their share. My father's heir, named in his own handwriting in the margin, initialed and witnessed, Nora Bennett. I already knew informally that I had a piece of the pub. I had never understood, until that box, that it was this formal, this binding, or this old. I sat on the concrete floor of that storage unit for a long time with the box open in my lap, going through the rest of it. A stack of photographs I'd never seen, my father behind the bar in his 20s, hair longer, grinning at whoever held the camera. A handwritten note tucked behind the partnership agreement, dated a few months before he died, addressed to no one in particular, that simply read, "Nora doesn't ask for things. That's not the same as not wanting them. Make sure she gets what's hers whether she asks or not." I read that line more times than I could count, before I finally closed the box and drove straight to Harrow Street, with it still warm from my hands. I drove straight to the Anchor and found Walt in his usual spot at the end of the bar, doing the crossword he never finishes. I showed him the box. He nodded slowly, unsurprised, the way people are when a truth they've been carrying finally gets set down in front of someone else. "Your dad made me promise not to push you on it," he said. "Said you'd find it when you were ready to actually be part of it, not just pull pints on Sundays out of guilt." He confirmed what the document said. The agreement had never been amended, never been dissolved. I wasn't just sentimentally attached to my father's bar, I was, legally, on paper, a 50% owner, and had been since the day he died. For the first time in a long time, sitting in that worn booth with the strongbox open between us, I felt something other than the low hum of being tolerated by my own family. I felt like I actually stood somewhere solid. Walt pulled a second, thinner folder from behind the register, his own copies, kept separate from mine all these years, in case yours ever got lost or you needed proof your family couldn't argue with. Inside were annual profit statements going back to the year my father died, each one with a line item, quietly maintained, crediting 50% of net proceeds to M. Bennett Estate, and then its successor, even during years I'd taken none of it, letting it accrue instead, because I hadn't understood what I was entitled to draw. "Never touched a dime of it without you knowing," Walt said. "Figured someday you'd want to see it added up. It's not nothing, kid." I looked at 11 years of careful, patient bookkeeping done by a man who owed me nothing beyond a handshake, and understood with a lump in my throat I didn't expect, that I had been building something real this whole time without ever once calling it that out loud. Walt's next sentence took the good feeling and cracked it straight down the middle. "Speaking of which," he said, rubbing his bad shoulder, "your sister's husband's been coming around here for months. Nice enough fella. Keeps asking if I'd consider selling. Him and some development outfit want to tear down half this block and put up glass and steel." I asked what he'd told him. Told him I'd think about it, told him I was tired and my knees are shot, and Arizona's looking better every winter. Then he added the part that made my stomach drop. He told me the family already knew, said you were fine with it, said it'd actually be good for you, get you out from under Sunday shift babysitting, his words. I had never spoken to Grant about selling anything. He had told an aging man my family had known for 30 years that I had already consented to losing my father's legacy, and he'd said it with enough confidence that Walt had believed him. "Didn't seem right to me," Walt admitted, "but I figured, families talk, maybe you'd changed. Maybe city life and hard hats made the bar feel small to you. I've been wrong about people before." I told him he hadn't been wrong about me. He'd been lied to, the same as I had, just from a different direction. Walt rubbed his jaw and said the thing that stuck with me longest that night. "Man tells you a truth once, and it's information. Man tells you a lie with a smile and a good suit, and it's marketing. Your brother-in-law's very good at marketing." I sat without description of Grant for the rest of the drive home, turning it over like a stone in my pocket, and by the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd stopped being able to explain any of it away as a simple misunderstanding. I started paying closer attention after that, the way you do once you know to look. A little digging, public records, the kind anyone can pull, though almost nobody thinks to, showed Grant's brokerage had listed him as lead agent on a proposed mixed-use development called Harrow Crossing, backed by a firm named Highline Development Partners. His projected commission on the full block assembly, according to the filing, was substantial enough to explain a great deal. A conversation with a cousin at a different family gathering filled in the rest, offered carelessly, the way people offer things they don't realize are secrets. Grant and Cammie had lost most of their savings the year before on a short-term rental investment that never rented, and were behind on their own mortgage. The Harrow Crossing commission wasn't just an opportunity for Grant, it was, from where I was standing, starting to look like the only thing keeping their household from coming apart before their daughter was even born. I ran the numbers the way I'd run a load calculation, because that's the only way I know how to make sense of pressure, cleanly, on paper, without letting the emotion of it distort the math. Highline's projected commission on a full block assembly, cross-referenced against public filings for deals of similar size in the same zoning district, put Grant's payout somewhere in the mid-six figures. Enough to clear their mortgage arrears twice over. Enough, I understood with a discomfort I didn't want to sit with, to explain exactly why a man who'd never once asked me a direct question about my life had suddenly become very interested in Harrow Street. Here's what I put together, sitting in my car outside Walt's building. With all of it laid out in my head at once, the Wren Room, the venue for my sister's baby shower, sat directly across the street from the Anchor. When I finally looked it up properly, its lease was held by a hospitality subsidiary of Highline Development Partners, the same company trying to buy the block my father's bar sat on. The baby shower hadn't just been planned without my input. It had been planned, deliberately, at a venue that let Grant walk his own colleagues past the Anchor's front windows under the cover of a family event, scouting the block in daylight while everyone toasted my sister with sparkling cider. I wasn't being excluded out of thoughtlessness. I was being kept comfortably in the dark while the ground under my father's bar was quietly measured for something else. I drove past the Wren Room that evening on my way home, slow enough to read the small hospitality brand plaque mounted by its front doors, the same interlocking logo I'd seen on Highline's public filings that afternoon. Standing on the sidewalk, I could see straight through the Wren Room's floor-to-ceiling windows to the Anchor's crooked little sign across the street, and I understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that whoever had booked that venue had done it with a clear sightline in mind. Whether that had been Grant's idea alone or something Cammie had simply gone along with, without asking questions, I didn't know yet. But I knew the view wasn't an accident, the same way nothing else about that shower had been. I called a real estate attorney, Priya Anand, who I'd worked alongside years earlier on a commercial inspection and always respected. I laid out everything, the 1994 agreement, Walt, Grant's claim that I'd consented, the Wren Room's ownership. She was quiet for a moment, then said the sentence that changed how I understood my own footing in all of it. If that partnership agreement is still in force, and from what you're describing it clearly is, no sale of that property can legally close without your signature. You're not a bystander here, you're half the deal. I'd spent most of my adult life being the sibling who got the shorter introduction at dinner parties. For the first time, I understood I was the only person in this entire situation who actually knew what was happening, and the only one whose name legally mattered on the one document that could stop it. Priya asked me to bring in everything I had, the strongbox, Walt's separate copies, the profit statements, so she could review the chain of title herself before we moved. I sat in her office for 3 hours while she cross-referenced every page against county records on her second monitor, occasionally murmuring something to herself that I couldn't quite hear. When she finally looked up, she said, "This is about as clean as these things get. Your father built you a very solid floor to stand on, whether he ever told you that in so many words or not." I thought about the note in the strongbox, make sure she gets what's hers whether she asks or not, and understood, sitting in that office, that he'd made good on it from 11 years in the ground. Priya laid out my options without softening any of them. I could call Grant directly and confront him, giving him a chance to walk it back quietly before the shower. I could tell Walt everything and let him decide how to handle Grant on his own terms. Or I could wait, say nothing, attend the baby shower as planned, and see with my own eyes exactly how far my family was willing to go without me. See whether the dismissiveness I'd spent years excusing was really as careless as I'd told myself, or whether it had a shape and a purpose I hadn't wanted to look at directly. I thought about my mother's voice, "Just be happy for your sister." I thought about my father's handwriting on that strong box key. I chose to wait, and I understood, driving home that night, that whatever happened at that shower, I would not be able to unknow it afterward. There would be no soft landing back into the version of my family where all of this was accidental. I called Priya back 2 days before the shower and told her my decision. She didn't try to talk me out of it, only asked one question: "Are you doing this to see the truth, or are you doing this hoping the truth turns out kinder than the evidence suggests?" I sat with that question longer than I wanted to admit. I told her, honestly, it was probably both, and that I thought I owed myself the difference between hoping and knowing, even if knowing turned out to hurt more. She said that was a fair enough reason to walk into anything, and told me to call her the moment the shower ended, whatever happened. Before the shower, quietly, without telling anyone, I had Priya file a formal notice protecting my recorded ownership interest in the Harrow Street property. A standard legal safeguard, nothing dramatic, but enough that any title search on that block would now surface my name and stop a closing cold. I didn't do it to punish anyone yet. I did it because I finally understood that the paperwork protecting my father's legacy needed to exist somewhere official, not just in a strong box in a storage unit. I went to the shower that Saturday with that notice already filed, sitting quietly in the county system, unknown to everyone in that room, the same way my ownership had sat quietly and unknown to them for 11 years. The Wren room was exactly as described: cream and sage, orchids, a harpist near the windows, 40 names on a seating chart at the door. My name wasn't one of them. I stood there long enough that a coordinator checked her clipboard twice and gave me the careful, practiced apology they train into people for exactly this moment. Cammy came over and blushed chiffon, laughing before she'd even finished crossing the room. "Oh, this is awkward. We're capped at 40, and honestly it's a pretty stuffy work-adjacent crowd today. Not really your scene." She glanced toward the window, toward the street, toward my father's bar. "Why don't you just grab something across the street? I hear that dirty pub's more your speed." My mother, arriving at her shoulder with a glass of champagne, added, "It really does suit you, sweetheart," with the specific church smile she saves for moments she wants, remembered as kindness. Through the window behind them, I could see the Anchor's hand-painted sign, the one my father repainted every few years himself. I smiled with my whole face. "You're right," I said. "I'll do exactly that." I crossed the street in under a minute, hand on my own front door, into a building I owned free and clear of every single person still holding a champagne flute behind me. Walt was behind the bar when the bell rang, and he looked up, took one look at my face and didn't ask a single question, just poured me a ginger ale, the same thing he'd poured me the day of my father's funeral, and set it down without a word. I sat at the end of the bar, in my cream and sage dress, utterly out of place among the regulars in their work boots, and watched through the window as, across the street, a coordinator in a headset walked briskly out to the sidewalk, phone to her ear, gesturing toward the block. I didn't need to hear the conversation to recognize the posture of someone confirming a site visit. My own sister's baby shower and Highlines people were already circling. 4 days after the shower, Priya called with something that made the whole picture tilt sideways again. A colleague at Highlines outside counsel, responding to the notice Priya had filed, had shared, reluctantly, once forced to disclose, a signed letter of intent already sitting in the deal file, indicating that Nora Bennett, co-owner of record, consents to the proposed sale of the Harrow Street property, dated 3 weeks before the shower. I had never signed a letter of intent. I had never seen the document in my life. Priya sent me a scan while we were still on the phone. My name sat at the bottom in a signature that looked, at a glance, close enough to mine to pass a casual check, and wrong enough to someone who signs off on legal engineering documents every week of her professional life, that I knew instantly I hadn't made it. I stood in my kitchen staring at my own name, rendered by someone else's hand, and the first feeling wasn't anger. It was a strange, cold kind of clarity, the same feeling I get walking into a building inspection, where the drawings don't match what's actually holding up the ceiling. Something had been built here that looked sound from a distance and wasn't sound at all up close, and now it was my job to figure out exactly where the load-bearing lie was hiding. Priya brought in a forensic document examiner as a formality, though I already knew what the report would say. It came back within the week. Inconsistent pressure, an unnatural hesitation mid-signature, letter forms that didn't match my known signature on file with the state licensing board. Forged plainly, not ambiguously. The notarization on the letter of intent traced back to a paralegal at Grant's own brokerage. When Priya's investigator called her, she remembered the appointment clearly, a man matching Grant's description, at his own desk, introducing the signer over speakerphone as my sister-in-law. She's swamped this week, just needs this notarized quick. No ID had been checked in person. It was a shortcut that would very likely cost that paralegal her commission, and it was the loose thread that made the rest of it impossible to explain away as a misunderstanding. Priya asked if I wanted the full investigator's report, or just the summary. I told her I wanted everything, every page, because I'd spent enough of my life getting the summary version of things from people who loved me. Reading it that night, I found a detail the summary hadn't flagged. A second document in the same file, a limited financial power of attorney, also bearing my forged signature, authorizing Grant to negotiate and finalize terms on behalf of Nora Bennett regarding the Harrow Street partnership interest. It wasn't one impulsive mistake. It was a plan with a backup plan, built by someone who'd clearly thought through what might happen if the first forgery ever got questioned, and had never once considered simply calling me. I called Cammy, not Grant, not my mother. She started crying before I'd finished explaining what the forensic report showed. I knew something wasn't right, she said. I saw a folder on Grant's desk with your name on a form and I didn't open it because I didn't want to know. We're behind on the mortgage, Nora. The baby's coming in 6 weeks. This deal was supposed to fix everything and I let myself believe it would just work out. I asked her whose idea the shower venue had been. She went quiet, then said, Grant's. He said it made sense for his firm's optics, said it wouldn't matter to you either way. I sat with that for a long moment, feeling something in me finish breaking that had been cracking slowly for years. It wasn't only about the building anymore, or even the forged signature. It was the plain fact that my own sister had let her husband build an entire plan around my erasure, and told herself it was a logistics problem, not a betrayal. I keep telling myself I didn't know, Cammy said, her voice thick. But I think I just didn't want to know, which isn't the same thing, is it? I told her it wasn't, but that I understood the difference better than she probably realized, because I'd spent 11 years doing a version of the same thing, not lying to my family, just letting them believe whatever was easiest, because the truth had always seemed like more trouble than it was worth. Maybe that's the actual family trait, I said. Not the pub, not the money, just all of us, quietly deciding what everyone else doesn't need to know. Cammy didn't argue with that. She just cried harder, and for the first time in a long time I let myself sit in the discomfort of her crying, instead of rushing to make it easier for her. Priya sent a formal letter to Grant, his brokerage, and Highline's counsel, laying out the forged letter of intent, the paralegal's statement, and the forensic findings, with copies to Walt as the other named owner. The letter offered one path forward: full mediation, complete transparency, in place of a referral to the State Real Estate Commission for the forgery and notarization fraud. It was framed as an offer. Everyone who read it understood it was also a line. My mother called 9 times over the next 2 days. I let them all go to voicemail, not to punish her exactly, but because I'd finally learned at 35 to wait until I had every fact in hand before I said anything I might have to take back. Highline's counsel withdrew from the Harrow Street Assembly that same week, citing unresolved title complications in a 2-line email that ended quietly, a plan my family had spent months building around me without ever telling me I was in it. On the 3rd day, my mother showed up at my apartment instead of calling, still in her work clothes, purse held with both hands the way she does when she's bracing for a conversation. She doesn't want to have. Richard says this could actually be serious for Grant, professionally. I told her it already was serious, that the forensic report had a state case number attached to it now, whether Grant's brokerage handled it internally or not. She sat down slowly on my couch, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, she didn't have a script ready. I don't understand how this happened, she said. I told her it happened one small dismissal at a time, for 11 years until the last one finally had enough weight behind it to break something. She didn't argue with that either. Mediation happened in Priya's conference room on a gray Tuesday morning. My mother arrived in pearls and visibly unsteady hands. Richard sat beside her, arms crossed, saying nothing. Grant wouldn't look at me for most of the first hour. Cammy sat closest to me, 8 months pregnant, which told its own quiet story before anyone spoke. "Been avoided if you'd just told us you cared about that place, Nora." "You never said anything," I asked her evenly, why caring about my father's business should have required a forged signature and a public joke about a dirty pub to surface at all. She had no answer that survived being said out loud in that room. Grant finally spoke, quieter than I'd ever heard him. "I didn't think you'd actually notice," he said. "You never seemed to want anything to do with any of it." I told him that not wanting attention was never the same thing as not wanting to be told the truth, and that he had 4 months to simply ask me directly instead of forging an answer he preferred. Richard, who hadn't said a word in nearly 2 hours, finally spoke. "Not to me, but to Grant. You put a quiet relationship ahead of a family. That's not a mistake, son, that's a decision, and now you get to live with what it costs you." It was the first time I'd ever heard my stepfather sound like the attorney he used to be, instead of the man who'd spent a decade quietly deciding my father's bar wasn't worth mentioning. I didn't thank him for it, but I noticed it, and I think he noticed me noticing. The mediator laid the facts out plainly. The 1994 partnership agreement was valid and binding. The letter of intent was fraudulent and unenforceable. No future sale could proceed without my documented, notarized consent. Grant, facing both the collapse deal and the exposed forgery, agreed to a formal restitution arrangement, and voluntarily disclosed the incident to his brokerage's compliance office before Priya had to. His license went under a lengthy review. It wasn't the ending he'd hoped for. It was the one that was actually his to face, honestly, for the first time in the whole affair. I didn't push for criminal charges against him or the paralegal. What I wanted most, I realized sitting in that room, was simpler than punishment. I wanted the truth on the record, permanently, where no one could ever again casually joke it back into something smaller than it was. Walt, relieved more than anyone, decided against selling entirely. Instead, with Priya's help, we restructured our old partnership into a clean, modern operating agreement, with Walt easing toward retirement on his own timeline, and me stepping fully, publicly, into the role I'd quietly held for 11 years. Grant's brokerage placed him on a formal disciplinary track rather than terminating him outright, largely because he'd disclosed the forgery himself once it was clear denial wasn't an option, and because Priya, at my request, sent a letter noting my preference for accountability over destruction. It wasn't mercy exactly. It was closer to what my father used to say about a mistake in the books. You fix the number, you don't burn down the ledger. Cammy paid down the mortgage arrears that spring with money from a source she never fully explained to me, and I never fully asked, because some things a sister lets stay between a sister and whatever she had to sell or borrow to make them right. Taking on full active ownership meant real changes to my life. Fewer Sunday shifts for fun, and more spent on payroll, insurance renewals, and a renovation loan I signed with my own name on it, no longer hiding behind Walt's. It cost me time, sleep, and a chunk of savings I'd built slowly over years of careful engineering work, the same patient, unglamorous kind of diligence my father brought to that bar every night for over 2 decades. I don't regret a dollar of it. I understand now that the version of me who stayed quiet about owning half of my father's legacy wasn't being humble. She was hedging, still hoping that if she stayed small and undemanding enough, her family would eventually notice her on their own. They didn't, until a signature. They never asked me to give Forrest the question. I'd rather have spent the money finding that out than spent 1 more year not knowing it. There's a particular kind of tired that comes from running a load calculation late at night, after a full engineering shift, then walking straight into a bar's back office to reconcile a keg invoice, and I felt that exact tired more nights than I can count this past year. But there's also a particular kind of steadiness that comes from finally putting your own name on the thing you've quietly loved your whole life, in ink that no one forged, on a document no lawyer will ever have to dispute. I traded the first kind of tired for the second kind of steady, and it was, without question, the better trade. It's been almost a year now. The anchor has a new sign above the door, same hand-painted style my father always used, that underneath his name, in the same lettering, is mine. My mother came in for the first time 3 months ago, sat at the end of the bar in an outfit entirely wrong for the room, and asked, stiffly, if she could help with anything. I handed her a rag and showed her how my father used to wipe down the taps. She wasn't good at it. She came back the next week anyway. Cammy had her daughter in the fall, a girl named Wren, which I noticed and never mentioned. She visits some Sundays now, without Grant, and sits in the booth my father used to read the paper in, and we're rebuilding something slower and more honest than what we had before. I keep one seat at the end of the bar, permanently reserved, no reservation card, no nameplate, just left open. It's usually filled within the hour by whoever off Harrow Street needs it that night. I like it that way. My father would have too. Walt still comes in most Tuesdays, though he's officially retired now, mostly to do the crossword and tell regulars a version of the Strongbox story that gets slightly more dramatic every time he tells it. Last month he finally let me buy him a proper vacation to Arizona instead of the extended visit he'd been quietly delaying for a year, and he sent back exactly one photo, himself on a golf course, thumbs up, captioned only, told you your dad picked the right kid. I keep that text saved. Some nights, closing up alone, I take my father's old bar rag down off its hook, the one he used until it was more whole than cloth, and I wipe down the taps the way he taught me before I was tall enough to see over them. And I think that if there's a version of being seen that actually matters, it isn't a seat at somebody else's table. It's this, a door that opens when you turn the key, a name above it that's finally plainly yours. That's my story. One forged signature, one seat that was never on the chart, and a pub that finally, rightfully, carries both our names above the door. If this reminded you that quiet ownership is still ownership, take that as your sign. Share it with someone who's always been told to wait outside. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.